morning and welcome to Rising. Thanks for moseying on by. We've got an excellent show for you today. Some very interesting, fascinating news, I think, to discuss. I actually have a radar today, so I can't wait to get to that. But first, we should talk, I guess, about Joe Biden's farewell, sort of, address last night, although he'll remain the president for several more weeks and months. President Biden did address the nation last night, saying that he's ready to hang up his cleats and pass the torch to the next generation. Let's watch.
You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation. You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. But there's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices.
Now, in his first speech since dropping out on Sunday, Biden also assured Americans that he would finish his term.
For the next 6 months, I'll be focused on doing my job as president. That means I'll continue to lower costs for hardworking families, grow our economy. I'll keep defending our personal freedoms and our civil rights, from the right to vote to the right to choose.
Many Democrats applauded the speech online. Former President Barack Obama tweeted, quote, "The sacred cause of this country is larger than any one of us." Joe Biden has stayed true to these words again and again over a lifetime of service to the American people. Thank you, POTUS.
And CNN's Van Jones got emotional while reacting to the speech. Let's watch.
He asked the question, does character still matter? Well, it does tonight. It does tonight. The kid with the stutter did good. He did good. That's a good man. He fell on the sword. He fell on the sword. Most heroes, they fight till the bitter end. He fell on this sword. He's an old guy, but the heart's still there. You know, the words aren't as clear, but the love is as clear. The heart is still there. And I think people need to look at this, because you had somebody sitting in that chair and he wouldn't give up power no matter what. Wouldn't give up power, let there be an insurrection, wouldn't get out of that chair. Even when the people voted for you to get out of the chair, he wouldn't get out of the chair. And you got somebody who's sitting in that same chair, showing that character does matter, showing that you can have grace, you can put the people first, you can pass the baton, and you're a bigger person for it.
But not all were so kind. Piers Morgan tweeted, quote, "Joe Biden didn't pass the torch to Kamala Harris, as he so disingenuously claimed in his sad, uninspiring address last night. He had his presidency and career torched by Democrat arsonists Obama, Pelosi, Schumer, Clooney, etc."
Yeah, point to Piers Morgan for this one. Joe Biden did not go quietly into that good night very quickly. Look, he could have passed the torch after he won, after the midterms, and said, you know what, I'm not going to run for a second term, and because I said I was going to be a change president, I was going to be a bridge to the next generation of leadership. That's what he ran on when he decided to run for president in 2020. But he didn't do that. He decided to stick it up and pursue a second term, even as grave concerns about his mental and physical fitness increased over time and then became dramatically apparent to all. And even then, he didn't step aside willingly or quickly. He just had the entire leadership of the party, Pelosi, Schumer, Barack Obama, George Clooney, the donor base, the donor class, the elite donor class, turn on him and make it impossible for him to continue his presidency. And now here we are. So I feel like this attempt to paint him as this great patriot for willingly ceding power is a little bit of abrupt historical revisionism, but that's what they're going to do.
I kind of feel similarly. It's almost like they're trying to evoke feelings of like saying goodbye to a sick elderly family member.
Yeah.
We should not feel that way about the President of the United States.
Who's still the president. He's still the president.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
You're correctly describing, like, they're putting him on the glacier or the ice floe and sending him off to sea. He's still supposed to be running the country at a perilous time for our nation when we're embroiled in conflicts all over the globe. Netanyahu visiting yesterday. We're going to be talking about that more on the show, the situation in Israel. This is a time where we need competent leadership at the wheel. And so contrast that with, everybody doing like it's a retirement party. The job remains to be done. Can he do it?
He sat there and bragged that he's one of the only presidents in recent history, maybe the only, who's been able to say we're not at war. And that's a weird thing to say when the Pentagon authorized airstrikes on Yemen yesterday, when you've been financing Israel's genocide in Gaza, when you haven't used your power as president to rein in the far-right leader of Israel, who is now speaking before Congress, getting standing ovations. It's kind of like sick that his legacy is what a good guy because he stepped aside. Yeah, because he stayed in office to get so old that he had to. And I think someone like Van Jones eulogizing him in this way that's very emotional might have been a part of the negotiating between Nancy Pelosi and Biden. He might have been like, fine, I'll step aside.
But everybody
I'll
has to say
relinquish the
nice things
presidency,
about me.
But I want Van Jones eulogizing me. I want them on the verge of crying. They're all going to need to say that I'm the greatest. Like, this could have very well been part of that.
You're absolutely right. That I believe to explicitly have been part of the deal because everyone is doing it. They're falling over themselves to praise him, not just Democrat media commentators and Democrats, and they're saying, oh, it's so brave of him. So what, we've not seen this since Roman times. What was it, Cincinnatus, or was the emperor who went back to tend his garden once the crisis had passed? That it's that kind of heroism on display.
He fell on the sword, Robby.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, how men have to think about the Roman Empire several times each week as it goes. So they're all praising him, but there's still a job to be done. And you're right about the war point. Okay, we're arming Ukraine, and they're at war. We're funding Israel, and they're at war. Biden's record on war, yes, he got us out of Afghanistan in a very messy way, although it was important to get out of Afghanistan. Trump, to the same extent, really hasn't started any massive new confrontations, although you're right to point out, drone strikes continue against the nebulous war on terror everywhere. A lot of continuity, actually, on foreign policy, more than I think the American people, the America First foreign people on both sides of the political spectrum would like to see. But let's not pretend this is peacetime. It certainly doesn't feel like peacetime, and our spending priorities are not as if it's peacetime. We're spending tons on our military and on foreign militaries.
Absolutely. It's good that everyone who was wondering gets to see the president is alive and is in the Oval Office again. I think that waiting this long to address it publicly was an interesting move because I think everyone that imagined him dropping out before Sunday imagined a video address to be the delivery method, not a PDF and a tweet.
Yeah, well, he just didn't want to do it. He absolutely did not want to do this, and he doesn't want to dwell on it, he doesn't want to talk about it, and now he's going to be checked out. I think that speech, rhetorically, he was just reading from a teleprompter. I don't think he read it with a ton of energy. I don't think anyone was watching it and saying, man, did we screw up? He has that fire. He still could have pulled it together. He seems incapable of campaigning, and so maybe it's for the best, although I do have a lot of questions and skepticism about Kamala Harris's electability that we're going to get to a little bit later on the show. Coming up, My Radar. Stick around, more Rising right after this.
I think a lot of our viewers will be able to guess, but Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, Jess, for the last month, the mainstream media has set its sights on President Joe Biden, generating a massive and unusual amount of negative coverage in order to end his doomed candidacy. But now Biden is out and Vice President Kamala Harris is in, and things have returned to normal. Consider this hagiographic recap of Harris's consequential weekend by CNN's Edward Isaac Dover. Quote, through all her calls at the Naval Observatory, Harris wore a hooded Howard University sweatshirt, workout sweats, and sneakers, reported Dover on X. They got pizza and salad for dinner. She went with her favorite topping, anchovies. Nature, in other words, is healing. Harris is now the beneficiary of a veritable torrent of fluffy, positive press. The Washington Post praised her Spotify playlist and her sense of style. Subtle changes to her wardrobe selections relay a new gloss of power and polish, while defending her against conservative accusations that she was picked for the Veep spot because of her race and gender. Media institutions such as The Guardian, CBS, and NBC also rushed to proclaim Harris a beloved icon of young people. Politico hailed her as Kamala Harris, Gen Z meme queen. This verdict is largely connected to pop star Charli XCX's endorsement, possibly, of Harris. The singer wrote on X that Kamala is brat, which is the name of her hit summer album, and some subject of scrutiny on Rising in the past few days. Now, it's not hard to imagine the comparatively energetic, active, and youthful Harris as a more appealing figure than the aged incumbent who occupied the top of the ticket until this weekend. Even so, a recent Quinnipiac University poll, conducted, however, before Harris became the candidate, showed her losing the youth vote to Donald Trump in a hypothetical matchup. Another analysis by CNN's Harry Enton pointed out that Harris has not matched Biden's 2020 numbers in terms of youth approval. These results may be outliers, and there's certainly time for her to improve. She has only been the presumptive candidate, again, for a few days. And as the official Democratic nominee for president, she will be expected to ultimately carry the under 35 crowd. That would not be a surprising result at all. Still, it's a cautionary tale. Vibes are not the same thing as votes. The truth is that Harris is remarkably untested on the national stage. When she ran for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2020, she received little traction and was among the first major candidates to drop out. Julian Castro, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Bernie Sanders, all of those people outlasted her, though she ultimately withdrew from that race before primary voting even took place. When a September 2019 poll from Emerson College showed she would lose her home state of California, the primary in that state, the poll had her in 5th place behind Biden, Sanders, Warren, and Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang was beating her in the state of California. So what's behind Harris's lack of popular appeal? For one thing, it's hard to know what she actually stands for. As California's top prosecutor, she was hardly a progressive. According to Harris, she sought statewide office in order to institute a plan on truancy. It's from her book. She said said plan involved locking up parents of kids who skipped school. Then, during her ill-fated presidential campaign, she decreed herself unburdened by what has been, to borrow a popular Kamala-ism, and embraced the George Floyd movement's demand for more progressive policing. At best, one can say that the American people do not understand what exactly she stands for. She'll now have the opportunity to make that clear. As the vice presidential candidate, Harris was ultimately part of the winning ticket in 2020. But for the vast majority of Biden's presidency, Harris has polled worse than her boss. It was not until recent months, when public approval of Biden truly collapsed, that she started to seem like the safer bet. In the weeks since Biden's disastrous debate performance laid bare the reality of his advanced age and cognitive decline, Democratic leaders, elite donors, and the mainstream media have dramatically shoved the president aside and christened Harris as the new standard bearer. They have done this with the nominal support of the rake and file. As polls have shown, most Democrats did want Biden to bow out. But unlike Biden, Harris does not have a long track record of winning national elections. She's an unproven commodity at best. One of Harris's greatest assets, however, will be favorable media coverage. Indeed, mainstream reporters are already trying to protect her on one of her most vulnerable issues. On Wednesday, Axios accused Republicans of unfairly faulting Harris for the dysfunction at the U.S. southern border, writing, "The Trump campaign and Republicans have tagged Harris repeatedly with the border czar title, which she never actually had." This notion that Harris was never named border czar is contradicted by earlier reporting in Axios. An April 14th, 2021 article by Axios reporter Shauna Chen explained that, quote, Harris, appointed by Biden as border czar, said she would be looking at the root causes that drive migration. That was not a one-off, by the way. Axios published 3 separate articles, all referring to Kamala Harris as the border czar, using that specific language. Caught red-handed, Axios demurred and published the following correction. The article has been updated and clarified to note that Axios was among the news outlets that incorrectly labeled Harris a border czar in 2021. They would rather say they were wrong than admit she was the border czar. Now, the updated article says that, quote, border czar was an unofficial moniker, as if the difference matters. The truth, let's just talk about the truth, is that Harris was in fact assigned to lead the administration's handling of that specific issue, and that is now inconvenient for the campaign since immigration and border security is Trump's most winning issue. Sorry about that, but it is in fact the truth. So this is a very good example, I think, Jessica, of the kinds of favorable coverage she is likely to get. This is going to be Barack Obama all over again. But the border czar thing was particularly hilarious to me. They called her the border czar. They called her the border czar over and over and over and over again. Yes, it was unofficial. She wasn't like, she didn't, receive the keys to the, she didn't bow down and have Biden go, I dub thee border czar, with like a scimitar in his hand. But she was tasked with handling border stuff, has perceived to have not done a good job with it, and the media just wanted to totally, we were never at war with East Asia, that whole thing into the past.
Are migration numbers down over the southern border, Robby?
They are.
They are.
They are.
And didn't they deport more Haitian immigrants than any administration prior?
Yeah, Biden's the deporter-in-chief for sure.
And didn't they also have more border patrol than the Trump administration under the Biden administration?
If you say so, I don't know.
That's true. That's one of Biden's policies as well. I just think it's a little bit...
So the American people are wrong to be so frustrated with Biden's border policies, is what you're saying.
I think they're wrong to assume that he was progressive or that we have an open border like we always hear about. We absolutely do not have an open border under Biden. And on the left, she's criticized for being too tough on the border, the Biden administration being too tough on the border.
I guess she should own her successes then. She should be mad that people on her own side in the media are trying to pretend she was not in charge of the border.
I think they're
all
just
going so well.
Being honest and saying, like, this is the time she was in charge of the border, this is the time she wasn't. Similarly, Joe Biden was tasked with the economic recovery post-financial crisis.
I don't think they're being honest. They're trying to pretend that she was never the border czar. I mean, it's a matter of semantics. That was a policy issue put under her purview. Right? I mean, it was. They were not saying she wasn't and she wasn't. They're saying she wasn't.
It's always
I'm not saying it's always her. They're saying she never was in the first place. They use that word. She never was the border czar. It's just false. It's just untrue.
That was them changing what they called her. That was Axios saying, we don't call people czars in the United States of America.
What do you mean, we don't? We do. They did. They did.
Yes, but that
if they're the we in that sentence, they did.
Right. But
and
it's not her official title.
What?
And so I think they recanted that because they were like, we don't want to call her something like czar in the United States.
But that's czar is a
It was a messaging thing. It was not about like what policy she's in charge of as vice president. And let's be real. She bowed out of the race pretty early on, and she ended up faring far better than the people she was running with. She ended up becoming vice president.
Because she got handpicked for that position.
Yes. And I think Biden ran 4 times for president before ultimately becoming president and getting more votes than anyone has ever gotten at the national level with 81 million. Harris was on that ticket. So I think she's already proven to be pretty electable.
Okay, we'll see. I don't know about that. She was, yes, I said that in my radar. She was on the winning ticket. There's something to say for her in that regard. But, she's going to have to demonstrate that she's not just like a California lefty. We don't know her. We don't know what her policies are. She has been invisible in the administration. I guess she doesn't want credit. You say she should be celebrating her tough on the border policies, but she doesn't want any credit for that. She doesn't want any involvement. She doesn't take any ownership of it because immigration is Trump's most winning issue. It is the issue Republicans are far and away more trusted. I'm not even talking about the actual policy of it. Like you, probably, I clash most.
You're more about the vibes.
No, I was going to say on immigration, I clash with the right more on that issue than probably any other issue because I do want to see more immigration, more legal immigration. I don't think, and I also doubt that harsher border security measures are going to actually succeed in keeping people out of this country. I don't think mass deportations are economically viable. I'm against all that stuff, regardless of where the right is. So I'm not making like a substantive policy judgment. For all I know, I agree with her. I don't think I do, but I might agree with her policies on the border more than I agree with JD Vance's. But the fact of the matter is the people don't. The American people are fed up with Democratic leadership of the border issue, and that includes her, whether you want to call her the czar of the border or not. By the way, czar is a unofficial term that we use all the time in American politics to describe the person in charge of fixing the problem. It's a long-running and long-standing thing.
Yeah, I
kind of like calling every controversy like X-gate since Watergate, right?
Mm-hmm. So, yes, he tasked her with handling the root causes of migration. She kept Title 42 in place if she was a part of that decision of the Biden administration, which many progressives didn't like. And I think this is the main weakness of Republicans right now, is all of their criticisms of Kamala Harris are like the same ones that Bernie staffers had of her in 2020, which doesn't make any sense, because if their base wants someone who's tough on migration, theoretically they would love that Kamala Harris kept Title 42 in place if she was making decisions on the border when she was called the border czar in 2021, when the administration made the decision to keep Title 42 in place. Now we're seeing that border crossings are down dramatically. So if you want her to be detaining people at the border, if you want her to be expelling people from the United States, you theoretically would like her border policy as a conservative or a centrist.
I mean, Title 42 is no good to me because the justification for that was to keep disease from entering the country. It was like to keep COVID out, which was stupid because COVID was already in the country and impossible to prevent the spread of. So the idea that like we couldn't let people in because they might have COVID was utterly absurd. And I don't want any government expanded powers based on COVID rationales. That is a shortcut to having all of our civil liberties violated at all times, as we learned over the course of the pandemic. So I was all for not keeping that in place.
Yeah. They've reduced the number of encounters on the border by 55%. They've changed Border Patrol policy. This is a part of why they hired more border agents.
Well, when?
The
in the last,
seven-day address
I mean,
has decreased to below 1,800 encounters per day.
Well, do you know why that is? It's because it's summer and it's too hot. It's a cyclical thing. It goes up and down. That happens every year, and it'll go up again in the winter, particularly, most Americans feel, if Kamala Harris wins the presidency, but we shall see, I suppose. More rising.
If you look at year-over-year data, it's also down, not just seasonal movements.
Down over last year. Yeah,
yes.
that might be the case.
All right.
More
Good job,
rising
Kamala.
right after this. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave his much-anticipated address to Congress on Wednesday afternoon. Here are a few highlights from his fourth speech on Capitol Hill, one in which he clearly came to make the case for Israel's campaign in Gaza and get more assistance from the United States. Take a look.
Today, as Israel fights on the front line of civilization, I too appeal to America. Give us the tools faster and we'll finish the job faster. With the exception of a single incident where shrapnel from a bomb hit a Hamas weapons depot and unintentionally killed 24 people, the answer is practically none. You want to know why? Because Israel got the civilians out of harm's way, something people said we could never do, but we did it. Well, I have a message for these protesters. When the tyrants of Tehran, who hang gays from cranes and murder women for not covering their hair, are praising, promoting, and funding you, you have officially become Iran's useful idiots. And my friends, I came to assure you today of one thing: we will win.
Netanyahu received several standing ovations throughout his speech, but not everyone was impressed. Michigan Congresswoman and the only Palestinian in Congress, Rashida Tlaib, sat through the whole address holding a double-sided sign that read, "War criminal," and on the other side, "Guilty of genocide." Nancy Pelosi, who chose to skip the speech, posted on X, quote, "Benjamin Netanyahu's presentation in the House chamber today was by far the worst presentation of any foreign dignitary invited and honored with the privilege of addressing the Congress of the United States. These families are asking for a ceasefire deal that will bring the hostages home, and we hope that the Prime Minister would spend his time achieving that goal." Now, here to weigh in on all of this is Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Welcome, Trita.
Thank you.
Now, I think that it reminds me of Teddy Roosevelt a little bit to hear him say, we're on the front lines of civilization. And this goes really to what the heart of what you do at the Quincy Institute is, which is to really bring U.S. foreign policy to a point where we're not this sort of reactionary imperial power in the world calling all civilizations that are different from us uncivilized simply because they're culturally different or what have you. Can you speak a little bit to how this is similar to U.S. interventionism and imperialism at the onset of America, that this is maybe nothing new?
Well, I mean, this is part of parcel of a foreign policy based on primacy, which is that we have to dominate every part of the world, because then you will end up getting countries like Israel or Ukraine or anyone else who have their own issues. And some of those issues may obviously be very legitimate. But in order to win America's support, then you have to come to the United States and say, we are fighting your fight. We are on the front lines of defending civilization against monsters that are out there whose real enmity actually is not just with us, is with you. And this then drags the United States into every possible conflict around the world. And that's exactly where we have been. I think people should by now be able to see the parallels quite clearly. And if we had a foreign policy that was much more immune towards these type of ideological arguments in which we're painting the world, as Netanyahu did, in black and white, it's very simplistic. It's good versus evil. In fact, Netanyahu was starting off about in his speech talking about good versus evil. Once you start painting the world like that, rest assured, you will always be in conflict, endlessly and rather meaninglessly, because their world is much more complicated than that. But nuance is the enemy of people like Netanyahu. And incidentally, what he has clearly in common with others who also like to paint the world in black and white, such as ISIS and other terrorist organizations, is exactly that. This enmity towards nuance, this favorability towards a very, very simplistic us versus them, good versus evil world. And of course, we're here to defend you, America.
So Netanyahu's visit to the U.S. comes at a very dynamic time in U.S. politics, with Joe Biden declaring that he will no longer be the Democratic presidential candidate. So enter Kamala Harris, a figure who obviously has served as vice president, but if she has a different or similar, I don't know, what her foreign policy course necessarily will be. There's some dissension within the Democratic Party, with more progressive members of the base wanting a different Israel policy, others standing in strong support, like John Fetterman standing in strong support with Netanyahu, others dissenting. Do we have any indication which direction Kamala Harris might go on this, or whether Netanyahu's speech moves the ball in one direction or another? What is the future likely to hold in terms of U.S. support for what Israel is doing?
I don't think anyone really knows, because the issue hasn't been decided yet. I don't think Kamala Harris herself has fully made a decision. What we can see, however, is that, of course, there's a past in which she was very strongly in favor of rather hawkish Israeli policies. At one point, J Street actually chose not to endorse her because she was too far to the right in their view. But we also have seen that throughout these last couple of months, she has every once in a while diverged from the policy of Biden, including early calls for a ceasefire, which the White House tried to paper over. But it became clear afterwards that there actually was a substantive difference there. We also know that Phil Gordon, who is her national security advisor and who served in the Obama administration, left the administration rather humbled about how limited America's ability is to shape realities on the ground. He wrote some excellent articles in the Political and an excellent book about this, about how these regime change wars have made matters worse, and that during the Arab Spring, how difficult it was for the United States. It intervened in Libya, and the outcome was disaster. In Syria, it kind of intervened, but not really, and the outcome was disastrous there as well. And I think he left with a rather humble view that the United States simply doesn't have the capacity of turning these conflicts into what it wants it to be. And as a result, should pursue a much, much more careful foreign policy. Now, I don't know whether his perspective has changed dramatically in the course of the last 4 years when he has served in the Biden administration on Kamala Harris's staff. But if he ends up being an influential voice in a future Harris administration, which he likely will be if she's elected, and if he is still of the view that he held when he left the Obama administration, then I would be surprised if there wouldn't at least be some changes. We have also, of course, seen that Kamala Harris has done something that Biden, over a course of 9-10 months, simply could not do because he didn't want to do, which was to muster at least a drop of empathy for the suffering of the Palestinians, more than 40,000 killed. He never could do that. And that's the first thing she did when she was asked about it. She started talking about how horrible it is. She expresses empathy. She talked about friends she knows who have lost tons of family members there. But that, while I personally welcome that, I think is absolutely necessary, it is not sufficient. There has to be a policy change. And I think that's where the progressive base of the Democratic Party is going to have its focus on, which is there going to be a change of rhetoric, or is there going to be a change of policy?
So it seems Nancy Pelosi's statement is critical of Netanyahu without going so far as to calling for his arrest or calling the war on Gaza a genocide or calling for a permanent ceasefire, which is what a lot of the progressive members would like to see happen. But there is some indication that there's support if Harris decides to take that path and be very critical of the Netanyahu administration and withhold military support. AOC posted yesterday that, just so we're clear, Netanyahu has lost so many people that he's addressing just a fraction of Congress. And the congressional reporter for Axios, Andrew Solinder, said, by my count, roughly 100 of the 212 House Democrats were present, and 27 of the 51 Senate Democrats are in the speech. So just around half of each caucus was absent there. What do you make of this decision?
This is, it's really fascinating, particularly when you compare it to 2015, which I think about 60 plus Democrats sat that one out as well and held a press conference immediately afterwards and condemned him. At that point, of course, there wasn't a war in Gaza of the same magnitude that we see now. But then Netanyahu had come to the United States to speak against the president of the United States, Barack Obama, and the Iran nuclear deal at the time. And we saw that there was, for the first time, not just people sitting it out, but actively boycotting it, declaring that they were boycotting it. And this time around, we have almost twice that number of people. It shows you at the end of the day, Netanyahu has lost much, if not most, of the Democratic Party. And this is not an accidental loss. I think this has been part of his strategy. He has tried to make Israel a Republican issue rather than it being a bipartisan issue. He has tried to make sure that the actual base for support of Israel is the military-industrial complex and evangelical Christians rather than the Jewish American community. And to a large extent, I think he's been successful, but it's very fascinating to see that even among young evangelicals on the right, there is a shift away from Israel as well. So even though he's managed to push it himself out of democratic circles, I'm not so certain that the future that he thought that he would be able to have with the Republican Party is going to be as joyful as he envisioned it. Because if you are someone on the right, whether you identify yourself or MAGA or whatever it is, and you want to see an America First policy, and you're tired of endless wars, you're tired of meaningless wars in the Middle East, you're tired of fighting wars for other countries who claim that their fight is your fight. Well, there's no other country than Israel, and there's no other prime minister than Netanyahu that is pushing exactly that. So you really cannot be America First and then make an exception for Israel, because Israel is currently, at least, the country that more than anyone else is pushing the line of getting the United States to fight its wars. And particularly that's the case when it comes to Iran. And that's not a new thing. That's something Netanyahu has done for more than 15 years now.
Trita Parsi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The Democrats might be finalizing their 2024 presidential ticket. Current Vice President Kamala Harris is, of course, now going to be heading the ticket with Joe Biden stepping aside. She is the presumptive nominee. The question remains, who will be her running mate? That's a mystery so far. Different names, however, have been floating around social media. We hear them from well-connected insiders that there's a number of likely contenders. Leading the pack is Democratic Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, also Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and United States Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, one-time rival for the presidential ticket when he and Kamala both pursued it in 2020, both losing to Joe Biden.
And now Democratic strategist and former Wisconsin U.S. Senate candidate Steven Olikara joins us now to weigh in. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So you believe there's a short list among this short list. Can you tell us what it is?
Yes, I think there's talk about a final three, but I think it's really a final two between Senator Mark Kelly and Governor Josh Shapiro. Both bring their relative strengths and weaknesses. At the same time, you have lots of conversations about the other 7 or so candidates. And I think for a number of them, whether it's Pete Buttigieg or Tim Walz, they're trying to get their brands out there, get their profiles out there, which is an exercise that's happening right now. But I think it really comes down to those final two.
Yeah, Pete's problem is that he is in the administration, an administration that is not popular. I think Kamala Harris is going to want someone outside the Biden administration to join the ticket. Now, obviously, we as politically minded media people put a lot of stock in the electoral advantages or disadvantages in having a particular vice president, when in reality, history has shown the vice presidential selection rarely mattering from the standpoint of the campaign. It can matter if something happens to the candidate, as is the case right now. So it can be consequential, but whether it helps or hurts ends up not mattering that much. But I think she would do herself some good by, she's looking at one of these kind of moderate governors, like Josh Shapiro is in a state she must win. Gretchen Whitmer is in a state she must win. Mark Kelly is in a state it would be very helpful to win, is a senator rather than a governor. So are those the kind of considerations being made?
Yeah, I think you're right that voters typically don't vote on vice presidents, but the vice presidential decision is a leadership test for the presidential nominee. It says something about how they value the character of their vice presidential candidate, how they create a balance, a contrast between their leadership and maybe bringing someone in who can account for maybe some of the gaps and experiences that the presidential candidate has. So I do think from that perspective, it's important. Now, to your point, it helps, for example, if you have Governor Josh Shapiro. He represents a state where Kamala Harris can get some deeper inroads and have a better chance perhaps of winning. But Governor Shapiro, and this isn't getting talked about enough, he addresses something that I think is one of the core critiques of the Democratic Party right now, which is that the party has become too elitist. In the first executive action that Governor Shapiro took, he said that no longer do state employees in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania need to have a 4-year college degree. You'd come from an associate's degree or other non-traditional backgrounds.
This is a wonderful policy. I love this policy, wildly in favor of it. That was a good one.
That won me over immediately.
Yeah.
We need more of that. So I think from a branding perspective, and certainly he's a great communicator, plus Pennsylvania, nice contrast with Kamala Harris. But I think Senator Mark Kelly, one of the upsides with him is not only his background as an astronaut and a U.S. Navy captain, but also he comes off in the way he communicates as a nonpartisan, non-politician, in contrast to Kamala Harris, who spent most of her adult life as a politician. So I think that balance will be helpful as well.
So these are my two least favorite guys, I'm going to be honest. Kelly and Shapiro on the list, I think, are the two candidates that could just crush the youth vote and the progressive vote, which Harris really needs to deliver a victory in 2024. Kelly, because he hasn't sponsored the PRO Act and being against union labor in this kind of administration, in this kind of political environment, I think makes him a non-contender. And then you also have Josh Shapiro, who has equated these pro-Palestine protesters on students' campuses to the KKK. That, to me, makes him a non-contender as well. How do you think these two will be able to overcome these weaknesses that might be prohibitive when it comes to casting a ballot for progressives and the youth vote.
Right, I agree with that. I think one thing that we're seeing with Kamala Harris as an example, where you remember during the primaries in 2019, that her prosecutorial record was put on full display during the debates, and that became an issue for the progressive left. Well, you fast forward to today, Charlie XCX, Brat, all of that is happening. And so she's winning this sort of Gen Z culture war, at least she has for the last week or so. So I think the question is, as you talk about a VP nominee, can they also tap in culturally to younger generations and speak to, I think, what is one of the core issues for young people right now, which is trust in government. Are they going to actually speak authentically to rooting out the corruption and addressing the inflow of money in politics? One of those issues I think would be interesting. And Mark Kelly, for example, I know that he's been supportive of stopping insider trading in the U.S. Senate and in Congress. So I think those types of issues might be able to overcome some of the dynamics you're talking about.
Yeah, and what she really needs to do to win is to overcome the skepticism that rural working class people might have of her or have had of Joe Biden and the Democratic Party in the three most important swing states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, where I think Kamala Harris, some of her, to the extent that she has deviated from Joe Biden, I mean, she did run to his left, specifically on energy and environmental issues, was more militant about banning fracking. I think there are some weaknesses of her candidacy. Now, she has the opportunity to reinvent herself. She has reinvented herself before. I don't know if this is a criticism or a credit to her that no one knows exactly what her political philosophy is. She's, as you mentioned, tried to have it both ways on criminal justice reform, being a rather tough prosecutor when she had statewide office in California, then kind of shedding that skin when that momentarily became politically supposedly unpopular, although I'm not sure that was actually, if that was just, again, processing the vibes of the national media moment we were having. I'm not sure people actually were calling on her to turn off her tough on crime exterior. So anyway, she has a chance to present herself however she wants to, and what she's going to need to do, in addition to keeping, generating young people and progressive enthusiasm, is really to speak to and relate to working class people in the swing states.
Yeah, I agree, Robbie. This is such a great point. When you talk about the must-win states, it's states like my home state of Wisconsin, and obviously Michigan and Pennsylvania as well. And you really do have to connect not just with the Democratic base, but also white working class voters. And Kamala Harris doesn't naturally present herself in politics as someone who connects with that audience. To your point, Robbie, she has been reinventing herself and might be able to do that again. But ideally, the VP candidate can bring in not only some unique connection points and issues, but also something about their personal story authentically connects with the story of a former GM worker in Janesville, Wisconsin, for example. So if they can do that, I think that would be a huge win. If Kamala Harris gets branded as the coastal elite from California, I think that makes it difficult to connect in Wisconsin.
What about someone like Andy Bashir? This is someone who doesn't have the problem of being anti-union in his record, and he's not someone who has this problem of calling peaceful protesters members of the KKK or comparing them to. And he has captured a little bit of that Gen Z culture. They're making fan cams of him to songs from the Brat album. And when he went on late night TV, he spoke about JD Vance, and he said he's not from here. He's not from Appalachia. He doesn't understand these people. And it started a movement on Twitter of people hashtagging he's not from here with things like he washes his cast iron pan and other things that make him unrelatable to the white working class of Appalachia. He seems to me a good pick. Why do you think he's not on the top of the short list?
Well, I would agree with you, Jessica. Andy Bashir probably should be on the list. This is so funny, and it's so interesting how vice presidential politics works. So generally what happens is there's this trial balloon where they'll trot out these potential nominees on the national media. Let's see how they do. Well, Andy Bashir was one of the first ones. He went on Morning Joe the morning after Kamala Harris said she was going to be running for president, and Joe Biden stepped aside. And he did a few more media hits like that. And then suddenly he's been taken off of the short list. And I think maybe there's something that Harris's team saw that they didn't connect with. But I would agree with you on the substance in terms of trying to expand the electorate, which is necessary in this kind of election. Andy Bashir would be important there. One thing I just got to mention, since you mentioned Brat, is when we're talking about connecting in the Midwest, it's not just about brat, it's also about brat, right? And if you have a candidate who can authentically go to, Brewers games, or who can go to Lions games and can be seen there tailgating with their brats and grilling and that type of thing, that culturally speaks to something, and more people need to talk about that too.
People need to talk about the brat movement.
Exactly. We're starting it right here.
Steven, you're so brat.
Thank you. That's the best compliment I've gotten all day.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
More Rising right after this.
Trump's VP pick, JD Vance, is getting backlash for his 2021 cat lady comment on then Fox News host Tucker Carlson's show. And if you need a refresher, here it is.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children.
Yikes. Actor Jennifer Aniston, who's refrained from political comments, weighed in, posting on her Instagram story, "Mr. Vance, I pray that your daughter is fortunate enough to bear children of her own one day. I truly can't believe this is coming from a potential VP of the United States."
Alyssa Farah-Griffin, the conservative host on The View, also criticized JD Vance. Let's watch.
The other is this JD Vance clip. I saw it years ago, a couple years ago when he said it, but I am hearing from so many girlfriends, lifelong Republicans, that are so offended by it. Because if you're a woman of about my age or mid-30s, the most common thing that my friends are dealing with is infertility, miscarriages, struggling to get pregnant, wanting to and it not happening, or people who so badly want to get married but they haven't met the right partner yet. How dare you denigrate them and say that they are not as valuable, they don't have as much of a stake in this society?
So who is JD Vance? A recent Associated Press Center survey found that 60% of respondents do not know who he is. Staff writer for The Hill, Taylor Giorno, wrote an article giving a glimpse into Trump's number two. Joining us now to dive into JD Vance is Taylor herself. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So this is someone who is not super well known to the country yet. What did you find when you were doing reporting on this figure?
Yeah, so I'm the business and lobbying reporter at The Hill. I tend to look at how businesses and groups sort of look at these public figures that they're trying to influence in their daily lives. And right now, K Street is really struggling to decode this man who doesn't have an extensive legislative record. He was only elected to Congress in 2022, and he started in 2023. And he has signed on to some bills that we can talk about later that maybe make it even more complicated because he doesn't fit into this Republican traditional practice that I think a lot of people expect.
Well, because he's simultaneously, he is a former venture capitalist associated with Peter Thiel and kind of the tech world, right-leaning politics and all of that. So you might think that makes him a very business-friendly or sort of free market type Republican. However, he also has been partnering with Democrats on some antitrust issues, breaking up big tech. He has had Lena Khan, the very Democratic, very progressive chair of the Federal Trade Commission, who has been, waging war on Amazon and Apple and everybody. He said she's doing a great job. So is there a through line in his philosophy, or is it just it's hard to tell?
Well, I think in order to maybe get a sense of JD Vance, I maybe jumped the gun talking about sort of when he burst into the public space in 2022, but he didn't burst into the public space just in 2022. He actually really came to the national stage in 2016 when he published his book Hillbilly Elegy, which really became popular actually among sort of like the quote unquote liberal elite, because he talked about his upbringing in suburban Ohio, but also spending time with his grandparents in Kentucky. And he talks about growing up amongst poverty and addiction. And he got a bit of blowback from that, basically for suggesting that people from Appalachia, which is where I'm from, are lazy. And so he sort of came up with this populist, I've pulled myself up by my bootstraps, but he went to Ohio State. He then went to Yale Law School. And then you're right, he went from basically being this man from suburban Ohio, tough upbringing, to being a venture capitalist, working with Peter Thiel, who's a big Republican donor, and then eventually going on to found his own firm before eventually making a bid for Congress and getting into the Senate.
Now, he's been kind of called out for selling out the working class of America. I grew up in a working class family. A lot of our family struggled with addiction. His story is one that I think, I relate to, a lot of people relate to. I don't relate to him selling out to venture capitalists and big business. He's been called Shill Billy effectively as a nickname now. We had Pete Buttigieg sort of making a meal out of this whole thing on Bill Maher, saying rich guys are looking out for rich guys. That's why Silicon Valley, is supporting JD Vance, because it sounds like, although he grew up working class, he's not really fighting for them now. But I think a different facet of this is the cultural aspect, and that actually alienating women is something that's bad for business. If they have, a lot of businesses donating to this campaign and being associated with JD Vance, it's a bad look. And so he's now been quoted saying a year before a Senate campaign that actually parents who have children should be able to cast votes on behalf of those children. The Washington Post is re-reporting these old statements. Do you see him getting around any of this? There's reports that Trump might replace him. Do you see this being, the end of his political career in some way?
There is zero chance Trump is going to replace him.
Zero replace. Even today, he was out there backing Vance, saying, even no matter who Kamala Harris picks, or even if she hadn't been anointed as the new Democratic nominee, basically, I was going to always pick Vance all along. So I think that just like any other candidate in a very high-profile position, his past comments and statements are going to be picked over, and he's probably going to be positioning himself in every way possible to walk a fine line. I mean, you even saw him doing that on the RNC stage when he made the speech accepting his vice presidential nomination, basically trying to walk this fine line between saying, I am supporting workers, and also saying, but we need a country that's going to do great things for American business and industry. So the vice presidency is in many ways, until you're called into action, a more ceremonial role. You don't have the direct influence of maybe someone like the president. But I do think, moving forward in the campaign, he's going to probably try to mitigate some of those comments. And no matter what, you can say from a cultural perspective, he did his first campaign rally in Radford, Virginia, which is about 30 minutes down the road from where I grew up. About 1,000 people turned out, and there was a lot of energy in that crowd. And a lot of women included. They were saying, we're girls for Trump, we're girls for Vance. And I do think attaching himself to Trump in this way, who has also made his own controversial statements about women in the past and has clearly overcome them, I don't think he's going to have as much problem as maybe we would think.
Yeah, should he have called Kamala Harris a crazy cat lady? No, obviously not. And I see why some people will be put off by those comments. I think, what it reflects is that JD Vance is part of, this new national populism on the right, and that one of their kind of tenets is that government policy and really the GOP's focus in the past has not been sufficiently pro-family. And I don't mean that in the kind of Bush era, social conservative family stuff, but is not actually alarmed enough about the economic difficulties of raising a family at this time. That, while we have so many things, consumer goods and electronics getting cheaper, more affordable, the labor-intensive things like childcare are getting less and less affordable. And what is the government's plan, or what is Republican plan to deal with that? So when I hear him say things like, people who have children should have more of a vote or more of a voice, I think that's designed to position the GOP as the party that is trying to come up with a solution for the difficulty in raising children today. Not that, giving more votes to people with children is the right solution or a constitutional solution, because it's not, but.
Totally. So the economic issues in our country is why we have crazy cat ladies, Robby?
Well, what he's saying is that policymakers have not prioritized, that we want to make it easier. I think everyone wants to make it easier to raise a family in this country, to have children. There are people on the GOP side, but elsewhere too, who are concerned about declining birth rates in America. And if that's a choice people are freely making, that's fine. But if that's because of economic reality, because it's becoming less and less affordable to raise a family, then that is something they think policymakers should address.
Yeah. And it is a tough economic time for many Americans. Coming out of the pandemic, we've lost a lot of savings that a lot of Americans stored up. High inflation, which peaked at 9% year over year in June 2022. It has come down, but it's still pretty hot. It's hotter than the Federal Reserve would like it to be. And Republicans, Trump, Vance, have really jumped on that, saying this is what the Biden and Harris administration have done. And so they can point to the broader issues in the economy while these comments may be on childless cat ladies being the issue, can go by the wayside because they're like, no, that's not the big issue. This is the real issue, and it's caused by this administration, despite the fact that, particularly on inflation, the Federal Reserve is an independent body and not influenced by the president.
Now, I have to ask you this last question. Given your focus on reporting, JD Vance has the backing of Silicon Valley in a major way. We've also seen Silicon Valley throw some support behind Trump. I have read some interesting analysis of people who assume this is because a Donald Trump presidency would be inflationary, and that would make people question the value of a dollar. Whether that's legitimate or not is a whole other conversation. But this has been successful messaging from the crypto community before. Right. And so the assumption is that the reason crypto in Silicon Valley is backing Trump is because they create an environment that makes a bigger lane for cryptocurrency. What do you make of that analysis?
Well, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that analysis because a lot of venture capitalists and businesses in general don't like high interest rates because it makes it harder for them to borrow. I mean, that's why we saw layoffs in Silicon Valley, especially at the beginning of last year. And so anything that's going to drive inflation up and keep borrowing costs high, I don't think is something that maybe those venture capitalists or businesses would really enjoy. However, Trump has sort of been out there touting his support for the crypto community. And when you put that in contrast to Biden, who has sort of put out a framework on digital assets, but also, his SEC chair, Gary Gensler, has been very aggressive in going after a lot of these crypto companies that he thinks are violating securities law. There's a lot of high profile, disputes with Coinbase and Ripple, who are sort of on the forefront of this. And I think that that community really sees maybe Republicans and Donald Trump and Vance specifically as being more favorable to them if they were to take office.
Very interesting.
Taylor, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
More Rising right after this. Chaos erupted at Union Station in Washington, D.C. yesterday when thousands of pro-Palestine protesters gathered to condemn Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress. Now, at one point, protesters painted a, quote, "Hamas is coming" on the Columbus Fountain and wrote Gaza slogans on the Liberty Bell. They also took down an American flag, replaced it with the Palestinian flag, and then burned the American flag. Let's watch. Clashes broke out between demonstrators. Law enforcement also used pepper spray at times and did arrest at least 23 demonstrators after the chaos. A group of Republican lawmakers went to Union Station subsequently to raise the American flag. Here's Representative Mike Collins along with House Speaker Mike Johnson.
Hey, listen, Mike Collins, we just got through voting not too long ago, and I'm standing here with the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Earlier today, this is where they took down the flags. We're at Union Station now. They took down the American flags and hoisted up the Palestinian flag and actually burned our American flag just about 20 yards from us here. So we decided that we would come to Union Station tonight, hoist the American flags back up there, which is what we did. There's a couple of things you need to realize. Number one, this is the United States of America. Don't come here and don't take down our flags. Number two, we're going to stand with Israel 100%, always.
It wasn't just Republicans condemning the actions at the Union Station. Vice President Kamala Harris released a statement this morning saying, quote, "Yesterday at Union Station, Washington, D.C., we saw despicable acts by unpatriotic protesters and dangerous hate-fueled rhetoric. I condemn any individuals associating with the brutal terrorist organization Hamas, which has vowed to annihilate the state of Israel and kill Jews. Pro-Hamas graffiti and rhetoric is abhorrent. We must not tolerate it in our nation. I condemn the burning of the American flag. It should never be desecrated in that way. I support the right to peacefully protest, but let's be clear, anti-Semitism, hate, and violence of any kind have no place in our nation." House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries also released a statement this morning saying, quote, "Defacing public property, desecrating the American flag, threatening Jews with violence, and promoting terrorist groups like Hamas is not acceptable under any circumstance."
Senator Jackie Rosen similarly tweeted, quote, "The glorification of Hamas, a terrorist organization backed by the Iranian regime and holding over 100 hostages in Gaza, is unacceptable and has no place in our country." The Daily Wire's Ben Shapiro took issue with Senator Rosen's comments and said, quote, "Maybe your party should have attended the speech of the Prime Minister of Israel then, rather than declaring their emotional support for people who have been doing this shit for months." And Elon Musk also weighed in, saying, quote, "People who have been lifelong Democrats refuse to accept the clear reality that the Democratic Party is rapidly become openly anti-Semitic. This trend is accelerating, not slowing down. Knock, knock. Hello, Captain Obvious here."
Meanwhile, Politico had an interesting framing of the situation. Their headline read, quote, "Republicans pounce after Netanyahu protesters burn U.S. flags and wave Hamas ones instead." I laugh because conservatives call out time and time again how often when there's an issue where Democrats did something that is embarrassing to them, the headline is never "Democrats did something embarrassing to themselves." The headline is always "Republicans pounce." Republicans try to take it, using the language, it's often the word pounce, like, "Oh my God, how dare Republicans try to take advantage of a politically advantageous situation when the Democrats have embarrassed themselves." That's, a media criticism thing, but it's just constant, and the media doesn't even realize they're doing it, and they do it time and time again. Anyway, this was an embarrassing spectacle at Union Station. I did head over there yesterday. By the time I got there, the crowds had largely dispersed. There were just a couple protesters left. I did see the graffiti. Yes, it said "Hamas is coming," very sinister language to deface public property with. Violence, there's no place for it. I think Kamala Harris was very, very smart to put out that statement condemning violent protests and then condemning the rhetoric on display, but while being perfectly clear that absolutely people have the right to engage in peaceful protest on behalf of Palestine or any other cause. They have the right to utter pro-Hamas statements if they want. They should not spray paint them on public property, but they have a First Amendment right to engage in protest, sure.
What is embarrassing is the U.S. Congress, not all of them, of course we know about half of the Democratic caucus did not show up, but what is embarrassing is the U.S. Congress giving standing ovations to someone who is about to have an arrest warrant issued by the ICJ, someone who has directed their military to establish extermination zones, who's responsible for the killing of 186,000 people in Gaza, someone who is a perpetrator of genocide. That's embarrassing to be in a country where our representatives are standing and applauding him and invited him here to speak. So I think that it's good these protests were happening. And there's a lot of viral footage of someone who was said to be in a Hamas getup. And if you talk to her, which a lot of protesters do, she will tell you that the reason she wears this is to demonstrate that Hamas has been labeled a terrorist organization. And while there are many people who believe very terrible things, Palestine does not have a military. And she says she wears this to demonstrate that the Palestinian people have a right under international law to defend themselves against an occupation. And just like you have members of the Ukrainian military defending themselves against Russia who do have Nazi ideologies. I have friends who have gone to Ukraine to deliver humanitarian aid to cancer patients who cannot receive it. They say that some of the people defending Ukraine right now are very openly members of Nazi factions within Ukraine. And so
I
this
wouldn't send
idea,
any money to them if I was in charge.
Yeah, so you can say, I support the Palestinian resistance without being a supporter of Hamas. But to label all of these people anti-Semitic and all of these people Hamas is just not reality. They're protesting a genocide.
Well, maybe they're not all for Hamas, but although I would, again, polls of people in Palestine show widespread support for violent resistance against Israel. I think whether they have the right to do it or not is a little bit beside the point. They did do it, and now they're being blown apart and destroyed in response. They provoked a confrontation with a much more powerful nation, and not only provoked a confrontation, but they didn't just fight military targets. They kidnapped people, they murdered civilians in their homes, they killed people at a concert, and now Israel has responded. Do I support the response? No. Do I think the U.S. should be involved? No. Do I think Benjamin Netanyahu is a good faith actor or should be the leader of Israel? No. And in fact, many people in Israel, even who support the war effort, don't think he's the right person to be in charge anymore. But my point is that the actions by the protesters who have the right, we're not talking about their right, they have absolutely legal right to burn the American flag. That is a highly litigated before the Supreme Court issue, that they can absolutely do it, and I support their right to do it as much as I condemn them morally for doing it. I don't think, if you want to call attention to what Israel has done that is wrong or what is bad about Netanyahu, I don't know why you would engage in this form of protest, threatening us with a Hamas is coming language, defacing our public property, makes people more, this is the whole problem with protesters who, especially the ones who do these kinds of things, is that people hate their guts because this is awful, and it makes their cause totally and wholly unsympathetic. It will turn people away from the legitimate cause of sympathy for the Palestinian people who are absolutely victims in this ongoing horror. They are afflicted, the Palestinian people, with a group of advocates on their behalf who are, it's almost like they're determined to sabotage any kind of effort at peace, any kind of thing of that, because nobody wants to be associated with burning of the American flag, defacing of public property, violence. I saw them, they dragged a cop for a little bit, and then saying embrace of Hamas messaging. It's alienating.
So let me get this right. Because they have spray painted public property, one protester has, that makes you not have sympathy for the protest of 186,000 people in Gaza being killed by the Israeli military? That's how that works for you?
I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about how the American people will feel.
But you said what you care about in this protest is that they spray painted public property. And you said that makes their movement something you can't sympathize with.
No, I didn't say.
Or you're speaking for other
no.
people when you say that? Which people
I'm
said that?
thinking from a PR and comm standpoint that this is going to make their cause be less sympathetic to people, that they are afflicted with activists who seem crazy and ridiculous and can't be negotiated with. Their point is that Hamas is coming for us next. Well, then, okay, then I guess we should back the people that are fighting Hamas.
But the whole protest isn't about what one person spray painted. And I think it's ridiculous, and I don't think anyone is equating every protester for the pro-Palestine movement as people who believe Hamas should come to the United States. What they want is for the Israeli army to stop killing them and taking their land, something they've been doing since 1948, since the Nakba. And so this is something that's been going on for a very long time. Pro-Palestine protests have been going on for a very long time. Globally, there is a movement that is pro-Palestine. This is much more than one person in Washington, D.C. spray painting Hamas is coming. And I think this is one of the biggest problems with the political discourse in the United States, is that instead of grappling with reality, which is that the United States is falling on the global stage because of their support for Israel, we are violating our own policies and laws. The Conventional Arms Transfer Treaty says we cannot give weapons to human rights violators, and we've done that. So we're violating our own morals, laws, principles, and values by supporting Israel at this point. And to make this just about protesters were spray painting, when I saw videos of cops running at protesters and hitting them with batons. So if we were to put another country in this position, let's say there were people protesting, I don't know, in another country like Taiwan about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And they were saying, we support the Ukrainian resistance. And we saw, militarized police beating up those protesters. We would be saying, this is so undemocratic. How could they do this to free thinkers who are fighting for democracy? But because it's our good guys and their bad guys, we view it differently. And I think that's fundamentally the problem with the commentary around this, is we're so willing to say that because we support Israel, Hamas must be evil.
I think the conservative response to that would just be, well, we support our allies and don't support our enemies. And Israel is our ally and Taiwan is our ally, so we are on the side of our allies. I'm not even saying that's my perspective. I want to get us less involved in world affairs. And the arguments I end up having with leftists about this end up being kind of circular, because I agree and do not want to fund what Israel is doing. I think it is not our business and is not in our own national security interests. And if it were up to me, I would zero out the budget for funding of foreign wars, be it Israel, be it Ukraine, or anything else. I think that's what the American people want. I don't think they want their tax dollars spent on this kind of stuff. I don't think American involvement in the Middle East has made it a safer place or has benefited us in any way. I don't really want to take sides on a regional civil war between two groups of people who've been fighting each other since the dawn of time and have every intention of continuing it. They want to fight each other. So on some level, I'm like, well, then I'm not going to get in the way and not going to be involved in it. They want to fight, so they're going to fight. Taiwan and China, I mean, and I would say the same thing. Like, I am, of course, on the side of and sympathetic to people who seek freedom from Chinese oppression, but if they committed a bunch of terrorist acts against random Chinese civilians in some warped bid for freedom or greater autonomy, I would absolutely condemn that, not just morally, but I would say that's a stupid tactic because it's going to invite some brutal crackdown in response, like we're seeing with Israel and Gaza. Like, this was the entirely foreseeable consequence of Hamas starting a larger conflict with Israel, was that their own people, by the thousands, were going to get obliterated. And I think that's very, very, very sad. And for it, I principally blame the terrorist group that is unfortunately the governing authority of that region.
Well, that's the problem, is that if you're in a situation where you have an occupying force, Israel in this case, that will not let any weapons get into Palestine, will not let them create their own military. They have no way to defend themselves and defend their freedoms against Israel. And so, yes, fringe groups are going to come together and they're going to say, we have to fight this somehow.
It's the group that they put in charge.
They haven't held elections in very many years.
Right, because it's a terrorist authoritarian group, but they support, I mean, the polls show that they support
Exactly,
Hamas.
It's an authoritarian group. They support resistance to the occupation. And in this situation, they're fighting an oppressor. And so if that's all you have as a pathway to freedom, I'm sure some people will be like, thank God someone's fighting for us. Our children are being killed with snipers. Doctors have gone into Gaza, and they're addressing children who have been blown up.
Thank God Hamas fought on our behalf, as they're now being utterly destroyed by the thousands?
They were already losing their country. Israel has had this agenda for
there were
a very
things being
long
not
time.
ideal, things being bad. So yes, things were not great for the people of Gaza and the Palestinians before this. The whole region has been destroyed
So what are they to do
in response.
Then? If they can't fight back,
What do you mean? What are they going to do? Don't do terrorism. Don't do something that puts you in a worse. It's so easy to say don't do terrorism because
You're saying
even
what
if you
not
think
to do,
even
but
if
what-
you're saying
what
it's
should they
justified,
do?
even if put aside whether it's justified, even if it was justified, it would be a bad idea because the end result has been them dying by the thousands.
So, yes, but what should they do to get freedom? Should the United States be supporting Israel in that response?
No.
Okay.
I agree. I don't want to support
so
it. We
what should the
work toward
Palestinians do then?
The Israelis and the Palestinians and the Palestinians should continue to peacefully advocate for greater rights and recognition.
But what if
and
that
we should
doesn't
work
work?
toward.
That hasn't worked. That's been happening for many years. And now in the U.S., people are burning the flag and protesting
It not working
because
is
they
better
see
than-
the billions of dollars leaving the United States and going to support this. So they want to do something. These are our public dollars.
They are.
How should we ever
But
voice
based
this
on the
heard?
thing they did, they're farther away from that, and a lot of them are dead. So the thing they did was not. I just want recognition that what they did was not a good idea. It's not a good idea for them, even if you think it's totally justified, because it's come to this point where they've been totally wiped out in a horrifying way, a horrible way.
Well, that's not dealing with what I'm talking about, but I'll deal with that. So let's say you're someone who's kidnapped and you're trying to escape. And that's all you can do is try and escape because you're kidnapped. In the same way that Gaza is occupied by the Israeli military. And you know what? You say, I'm going to make a break for it. You try and fight your assailant who's keeping you there. He ends up beating you up. You're worse off. Human beings have a natural inclination to want freedom and self-determination. So they're willing to try anything. Israel responding with a genocide and the United States supporting it is what these protesters are standing up against. They're burning the flag because they don't feel proud to live in a country that's complicit with this.
Well, I don't think we should be complicit in it either, but I don't think they're doing themselves any favors by engaging in such kinds of protest tactics, although they have the right to do it. I think it makes people less sympathetic to the Palestinians, but I could be wrong. I'm tremendously sympathetic to them, and I wish for an end to the occupation and for them to have their own state free of Israeli occupation and also free of Hamas, the terrorist organization that they did vote to put in charge of them. And there's never going to be peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis as long as Hamas is the organization running the thing. So I wish
And
we
as
could
long as
agree.
Netanyahu is in power.
Well, Netanyahu can face democratic accountability in his own country and is likely to. Hamas is not going to face democratic accountability because they're a tyranny.
Them from having elections.
Well, Hamas is preventing them from having elections. Hamas seized power and is maintaining it. Israel has offered an end to the struggle if Hamas surrenders and goes into exile, the top leadership, and which I fully support. And then they could have more moderate leadership, and in full support of a two-state solution. But Hamas doesn't want that, and so we don't have it.
Hillary Clinton said in 2006 that when they hold elections in Palestine, we've got to make sure that people friendly to Israel and the United States win, and has essentially promised to use covert affairs to make sure that happens. So if you have the United States promising to rig your election, would you hold one? It seems unstrategic there.
I guess, no, but like if Hamas look, they're just not going to let on their border. Israel's not going to let. It's a reality. A terrorist organization run the territory next to them. I mean, do you want Hamas to be in control of Gaza? Do people on the left, are they for Hamas, an organization that does not allow its people to choose their leaders, to be the people in charge of the
Is it Hamas or is it the United States and Israel? It's the United States and Israel. They are the reasons they have not had elections. It's the U.S. and Israel, and so it all used to be.
Why are we not?
That was
No. It's a hands-off. No. They've said the territory gets to govern itself. They're not in charge of it, and they picked Hamas, and they haven't been able to pick anyone since because Hamas is an authoritarian organization.
No, it's been an illegal occupation recognized by international bodies for very many years, over 40 years.
You're saying
now.
Israel and the U.S. is stopping Hamas from holding elections?
They're stopping elections from happening in Palestine. They can't even have their own army. They don't have their own country. They don't have a right to self-determination.
They stop elections from being held.
Yes, Robby. And so what we're dealing with now is Israel, who has established a country on Palestinian land and territory. So to say that Hamas is a terrorist group on Israel's border is just not accurate. It's land that's been stolen and is occupied by Israel and has been since 1948. So sure, Palestine is on their border, but they put the border there because it exists on land that used to be shared by Jewish people and Arab people.
Land was,
and Israel established a military state on top of it.
We gotta live in the present. All land was somebody else's at some point, and you can make your peace with things that happened that were bad in the past and try to build toward a better future, or you can be obsessed with it forever to the point where all of your people get massacred. I know which thing I choose, but Hamas has a different attitude about it.
I think we're going to have to agree to disagree, but of course we will always be following this. More rising after this. Joy Reid is standing up for Vice President Kamala Harris and her laugh, posting this clip on her TikTok account. Let's watch.
So my feeling is that when she's president of the United States, I will call her Miss President, but until then, you're just Kamala.
All right. Okay. No, I'm Big Sister. Big Sister General.
So first of all, it's a delightful video. Let's just keep it real. I actually, I know that, the right tries to mock Kamala Harris's laugh and try to shame her out of laughing. I actually think politicians should laugh more. Let's start with that. I think politics would be so much more authentic if people just kept it real, right? And that is her laugh, and they're sisters, and they're really like that when they're together. But what's remarkable about that is it does two things. For one thing, it does refute this idea of sort of mushing the joy out of, politics and being in that business. Like, people should just laugh and be who they are. And women should not be mocked for laughing, okay? It is a sort of common thing to put down women by mocking their laugh. It's not a good idea, and I think she should just laugh as much as she wants, and so should all of us, right? If we want to laugh, we should laugh.
I love how she put, how did she know on the top? Like, how did she know she would be president? I think she was just being like a supportive sister. Like, you're going to be the president one day. You love politics, right?
Like how Hillary Clinton put happy birthday to this future first female president.
It's different when you're
Twitter.
Doing it for yourself, though, isn't it?
Yeah, and that didn't come to pass. I don't have any problem with Kamala Harris's laugh. I agree that laughter is good. Some people call it the best medicine of all, Jessica.
And our country needs to heal,
And our country needs to heal. She has I'm not going to say anything negative about it. She has a unique laugh, and that's fine. we're going to be talking about Kamala Harris a lot for the next several weeks and possibly for the next several years. And people are going to say criticisms of her that I think are dumb, and people are going to say criticisms of her that I think are correct. And we're just going to, separate the two. I would urge Republicans, not to criticize her in ways that will make, alongside the JD Vance. Again, he didn't say this recently. He said this years ago. The crazy cat lady, accusing her of not having kids. Obviously, she raised her stepchildren. Accuse her of being unfit on ways that sound like you're saying it because she's a woman or she's black or something like that. You shouldn't say that. I do think, and we had this debate the other day, and I'm sure we'll have it again, that she was in fact elevated to the position of vice president for identity-based reasons because they vowed to do that. The media made Joe Biden promise to do that, and that will continue to be a knock on her. Is that the best way to criticize her? No. I would, if I'm the Republicans, I would focus on the fact that she ran to Biden's left on many policies, including environmental and energy policies that will not be popular in the swing states she needs to win. I would highlight that she has gone back and forth on what kind of politician she is in terms of, she's an attorney general in terms of crime. Is she a progressive on criminal justice? Is she not? Did she, betray what she actually thinks in an insincere way? I would hit her on that kind of stuff. But, the reality is we make fun of our politicians for all sorts of reasons. Like Donald Trump is mocked for his appearance by progressives, by liberal media constantly. And no one treats this like a federal crime, nor should they. Trump is a hilarious character, and it is okay to mock his weird hair and his mannerisms and his stiff movements, and it's okay to make fun of political figures. This isn't a monarchy. This isn't where the king is going to chop off your head because you say something nasty about him. We shouldn't seek to live in those times. So while I think some criticisms of political figures, the way they look or attributes are in bad taste, it's fine to do it, and I'm not going to get overly mad if you do.
Yeah, I think the right response to these criticisms of Kamala's always laughing, it's just ridiculous to even point that out. The right criticism is, these guys are weird. It reminds me of just high school, not even high school, middle school drama, where some girl is a little bit loud and outspoken and the weird kid in the class is like, why is she always laughing? No one usually cares about that kid's opinion, but then he runs for Senate and gets a seat and says it on Fox News. It should be handled the same way. This is a weird person with a weird opinion. Focusing on Kamala Harris's laugh is one of the biggest mistakes they made because it's not substantive and it makes them seem miserable, they hate joy.
Nobody's focusing on it. Well, who's focusing on it is the Joy Reids of the world because they want to pretend that that's what conservatives are focusing on.
Trump is calling her Laughing Kamala as a nickname. It's a focus.
He comes up with nicknames for everybody. What has been a focus of the media is all about her sense of style. As I pointed out on my radar today, it's been all about her sense of style, her aesthetics, her personality, her fashion choice, what she likes toppings on her pizza. It has been totally geared to treat her as some pop star that the media wants you to fall in love with. The coverage has been so skin deep, not focused on her record whatsoever. So I would accuse the liberal media of doing exactly what conservatives are being accused of. Conservatives are talking about her record or lack thereof. They're talking about how voters feel that the border is still not remotely solved, even though she was. No one can lie. No one can pretend otherwise that she was the border czar, and people feel like she did not do a good job with that. But the media wants to focus on these surface things having to do with her.
That's interesting. I mean, everyone has a different algorithm, right, Robby? Because my algorithm's showing me stuff about Kamala that's really surprising me. I've gotten reviews of her 2020 campaign and what we can anticipate from a 2024 presidency. I didn't know she began her campaign in 2020 running on a tax cut for middle class, middle income and lower income voters.
Great.
I didn't know she ran on a pay raise for teachers. I'm learning a lot about Kamala this week because of what I'm getting in my algorithm. It's substantive stuff about her policy and who she is, and I think I'm learning about her things that I didn't learn on the Bernie campaign because my algorithm at the time was very anti-Kamala Harris because I was on Team Bernie. But I'm learning some things that are winning me over. Like she pushed for programs that help people find jobs instead of putting them in prison. These are shown to reduce recidivism rates, people becoming reoffenders for the same crimes. She refused to pursue the death penalty against a man who was found guilty of murder, and she personally opposes the death penalty. I think that's a good progressive policy. She implemented training programs to address police officers' racial biases, and she fought for key reforms like establishing the first database on police shootings in the country. So there's a lot I'm learning about Kamala Harris that I've learned since she became the pick. So, I don't know, everyone's algorithm's different. I'm not getting the pizza toppings, Rob.
I'm seeing the pizza toppings. And anchovies? Who wants anchovies on their pizza?
Italian people, you're Italian.
I am,
Your
but I don't want
grandmother never did that?
No.
My grandmother liked those.
I'm kind of a ham and pineapple guy.
Uh-oh.
I know that's a controversial one, but
that.
I love me some ham and pineapple.
I don't eat meat, but I do like pineapple too. So.
Yeah. You don't eat meat at all?
No.
Really?
Yeah, totally vegetarian. I became vegetarian when I was like in 3rd grade. I told my mom, I was like, I don't want to eat pigs or cows, and that's what meat is. And she was like, yes, it is. I was like, I'm done. And she thought it was a phase because I was young, and then I haven't eaten it since.
And you've
so I'm a bit
stuck
stubborn.
to it.
But I want to get to this. You said I was allowed to bring this up. I asked permission. An astrologer also predicted a Kamala Harris presidency. Her name is Starheel. She posted April 14th, 2020. Kamala Harris is about to have her nodal return to her ascendant. I wouldn't be surprised if she is chosen as VP. This is April of 2020. Then you have her also saying, Kamala Harris will be 60 in 4 years. I see her running for president in 2024 since this coincides with her Saturn return in August of 2020. Then, 10 days before Biden stepped down on the 11th, she said if Biden is made to step down because he won't on his own, so she agreed with you, it will be at the Capricorn full moon at 29 degrees Capricorn. Someone said, what date is that? She said July 21st. Down to the date.
You know, it's fascinating. I don't know what it says about me or this show, but every person who ends up sitting in that chair for any length of time, except maybe Ryan Grimm, has been a fan of astrology. What are you? What is your sign?
I'm a Sagittarius.
I don't know what that means, but you're a Sagittarius. I'm a Leo.
Everyone
My
on the
birthday's
show
coming up.
is also always fire signs.
Okay.
When's your birthday?
It's August 8th.
August 8th. I'm going to DM that to Starheel and see what she has to say about you.
I would be happy to find out. Well, maybe there's the hidden wisdom of the stars that we could take some knowledge from.
Yeah, we can use it for the show. It's called Rising, which does give like astrology vibes. Mm-hmm. It's based on centuries of data, Robbie. And as a data-driven analyst, I appreciate that.
All right, I will not argue with you on that one. There's no point. That does it for us today on Rising. Great having you in all week, Jessica. For those of you who don't know, Jessica's going to be here for the next couple of weeks, although you're going back and forth from your hometown back to DC. You're doing a lot for the show, and we really appreciate it.
Yes, I get to visit home on the weekends. It's very good. But I'll be back tomorrow, not from this chair, but from North Carolina. We're going to do another classic Jessica and Amber Friday.
Wonderful. Well, I will be tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can get your podcast fix. And I'll see you next week.
Bye, y'all.